In 2019, in Oregon, Republicans in the state legislature walked out over a tax bill they didn't like. They left and they used their absence to deny the legislature a quorum, which brought the legislature to a halt for days. Then a couple of months later, they did it again. This time it was a climate bill they objected to. Several of them in that case fled the state. When the governor of Oregon sent state police out to bring them back, one Republican senator said that the police had better, quote, send bachelors and come heavily armed, as in, don't send anyone with a wife because the wives will be sad when we kill the police officers you're sending. There never was an armed showdown with state troopers, but the Republicans in Oregon did succeed in killing that climate bill by using that tactic. The next year, they did it again. They walked out as a group 2 weeks before the end of the legislative session, and they never came back. That killed the climate bill again. It killed 20 other pending bills that they decided just shouldn't be voted on at all. Then the following year, there were 2 more Republican walkouts, several days each. Under the state constitution in Oregon, you need to have a quorum to have the legislature in session. 2/3 of the lawmakers have to be present to do any business. So when the Republicans have done these repeated walkouts, it has stopped the legislature from functioning for any purpose, and it's happened year after year after year. So Oregon voters decided they didn't want this to happen anymore. In 2022, Oregon voters voted to change the state constitution to try to fix this problem. By a very wide margin, Oregon voters enacted an amendment to the state constitution that says any legislator who has more than 10 unexcused absences is not allowed to run for re-election. So you don't get thrown out, you get to finish your term, but you can't run again. Voters approved that as an amendment to the Constitution in 2022. And then what do you think happened in 2023? Not only did the Republicans in the legislature walk out again, they staged the longest legislative walkout in modern U.S. history. Oregon Republicans left for 6 weeks. They staged a boycott over Democratic legislation on abortion and other issues, but they just skedaddled. They got out. And if this tactic sounds familiar, it should. Both parties have done this in various states at various times. Wisconsin Democrats famously did this to try to save union rights. Texas Democrats famously did it to try to stop a huge power grab by Republicans in Texas. The other states have done it. Other parties have done it. The difference here is that there are now consequences for doing it. Oregon voters overwhelmingly voted to change their state's constitution to say, okay, from here forward in our state, there will be consequences for you if you do this over and over again. You will not be allowed to run for office again. And even after voters changed the state constitution to say that, the Republicans in the legislature just kept doing it. And so now their actions inevitably have produced consequences, very predictable consequences. But they're still shocking consequences. The Oregon Supreme Court has now ruled unanimously that, sure enough, these Republican senators, 10 Republican senators, are no longer legally allowed to run for re-election. They plainly and deliberately violated the newly amended state constitution, so they can't run again. And obviously, this is a huge deal in that state. I mean, this is almost all the Republicans. This is fully 1/3 of the state Senate that has just been ruled ineligible to run again. So it's a big deal there. But also, yes, this is kind of a microcosmic version of what we're about to see on the federal level at the Supreme Court Thursday of this week, when the country's top court decides whether Donald Trump himself can be blocked from the ballot for violating the U.S. Constitution. In a small and microcosmic way, a very consequential way, they're doing it first in Oregon, right now. So how's that going? Joining us now is Julia Shumway. She's deputy editor at the Oregon Capitol Chronicle. Ms. Shumway, I really appreciate you making time to be here. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
What's been the reaction to this unanimous state Supreme Court ruling that says they can't run again?
There's been, it's generally been applauded by people who supported the amendment in the first place. The Republican state senators view this as a political act by the court. They noted that the court has been the justices who ruled on this were entirely appointed by Governor Kate Brown, who was a Democrat.
In terms of the fight here, obviously, the state Supreme Court decision on a matter of state law and state constitutional authority, you would think that would be the end. But I understand there's probably at least there's a federal challenge that at least probably has some traction in terms of the way Republicans are going to try to advance their case. What's the status of their federal court challenge to this?
Yeah, there's a separate federal lawsuit that was filed under First Amendment claims, essentially that these Republican senators have a right to protest, and their right to protest was being curtailed. A judge denied a preliminary injunction in that case in December. We're waiting on a ruling from the Court of Appeals, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, on an appeal to that ahead of the March 12th filing deadline here.
While the country is considering this disqualification issue for President Trump at the Supreme Court, to have Oregon going through this exercise is really a remarkable confluence of events. Julia Shumway, deputy editor at the Oregon Capitol Chronicle, thanks for helping us understand. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.